Welcome to another Omega Matters, where we all talk all things omegas. I'm Christina Jackson. We have Bill Harris here, and today we're welcoming Dr. Laurel Wentz to talk about her deep dive into the omega-3 index and supplementation and diet and everything that affects the omega-3 index. She recently published a large paper that we're going to talk about. Dr. Wentz is an associate professor of nutrition at Appalachian State University. She's also a registered dietitian and a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics. So she's got a lot of practical knowledge. She focuses on the impact of nutrition on metabolism, inflammation, and immune function during exercise. So we're going to get to all of this. Thank you for coming on Omega Matters. Dr. Wentz or Laurel, what would you like us to call you?
I'm Laurel. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited. This is my first podcast.
Oh,
really? Oh, good.
Well, we're fairly low tech, so it'll be great. We're excited to talk to you. So we would love you to start off just telling us a little bit about yourself and your research and how you kind of came to this topic.
Sure. So I'll try to keep it brief because it's a long story. And if you could, if you looked even like PubMed, searched my name or Google search, you would find a variety of interests and a variety of topics. So I'm definitely not an expert in all of those. It's actually a thing here. They're like, can you please pick a research stream? I know a lot of people. So anyway, my background is sports nutrition. And I went to Penn State as an undergrad, and all I wanted to do was study sports nutrition. And luckily we had a at the time when like nobody else did, Christine Clark.
I worked with her. I just have to stop you. I went to Penn State for grad school and worked with Christine Clark.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So I'm from Pennsylvania originally. And my whole family went to Penn State. And so I went to Penn State from 2000 to 2004, actually biology major, thought I wanted to go to medical school, realized I did not want to go to medical school, did not want to be an athletic trainer, and did an honors thesis with Chris Clark. I emailed her after and was like, you were such an inspiration, like at the time when they didn't have full-time dietitians and she had a PhD. Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, she was fantastic.
So
she was really a pioneer.
Yeah. Cool. So at that time, I was looking at grad schools and I wanted sports nutrition and somewhere warm. So I went to the University of Florida, which brings Michelle Rockwell into it. She was the director of nutrition at the University of Florida. So I was there 2004 to 2006, interned with her, which then Florida State was trying to build their program. And they were like, we want to know what Florida does. What's going on in Florida? So I got hired at Florida State, but only as a GA to start, did my PhD under Emily Hames, which I lucked out in so many ways, not financially, but academically. And ended up working with Chris Clark and worked with the track and field team and did a lot of vitamin D research.
Okay.
Then I took a job with Special Forces in U.S. Army. They were just building up their human performance program, and that was my first time in North Carolina. So I worked at Fort Bragg. I did that for 2 years. It was great. The service members were great. I thought when I finished my PhD, I was done with research, and I was not done with research. So I took a job at East Carolina University and still tried to work with the military, but realized without a postdoc and working in athletics full-time through my PhD, I wasn't really well equipped. So I, very unorthodox, in 2015, 3 years into a tenure track role, quit my job at East Carolina University and moved to a small island in Wales, North Wales, United Kingdom, and did a postdoc with Neil Walsh and did exercise immunology and vitamin D with military recruits. Cool. And so we did that study for 2 years. I learned so much. But one of the things I learned was I definitely wanted to live in the mountains. And so that's why I took the job at Appalachian State, which you even pronounced correctly. They're very uptight about it here.
Well, how do people mispronounce it?
Appalachian.
Appalachian. What did I say? Appalachian?
You said it correctly. I think
you
said
good.
Appalachian.
I don't know if I did, but
yeah, they're very. It's a thing. So I'm not from, but I know it's a thing.
Like the Ohio State, the Penn State.
So I got here, worked with David Neiman, exercise immunology, was doing a lot with him. And then it was kind of done with vitamin D. It's interesting, but a lot of stuff's been done on it. Then I was doing some other small budget studies with wrestling and body composition and climbers, working with David on some bigger studies. And then I had this honors student and we had done some stuff with fat metabolism and she needed to write an honors thesis. So I was looking at, and I'd always wanted to do omega-3s. When David and I had talked about it at the North Carolina Research Campus, they had we started working with an industry and had written a proposal to do some work with omega-3s. It did not go through. The funding just fell through. But then the other thing that happened here is is David Barker, who actually funded this manuscript, the publication fees, is an alum, not of our nutrition program, but of App State. And he came to visit and was really interested in omega-3s, and we talked more about it and talked about a trial. And I thought this was going to be a small project, this review. I was like, let me just look up some papers and see how supplementation affects the omega-3 index. I'm like, it'll be a nice little honors thesis. Well, we looped Michelle in because she and I had run into each other at a conference, and I knew she was doing a lot of work in this area, and we need an outside reader. So I was like, Michelle, can you help us with this? Thinking it's just going to be this very small thing. It evolved into the paper that we have now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my first dive into omega-3s, but I've always worked a lot in omega-3s, not on the research side necessarily, but, military, traumatic brain injury, inflammation. So I had done a lot, and I'd written some grants with traumatic brain injury. They weren't ultimately funded, but for some nutrition intervention, which was not just omega-3, but that among other things.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to work in it, even though my name wasn't associated with it, I was interested. So that's, how we came about this. And we pulled in Michelle because I knew I wasn't an expert and I wanted somebody who was.
That's so cool.
You're becoming an expert. This is how you
This is a really good start. It's just fun to hear how people's pathways just lead them through the research. It's jobs, it's research, it's life, and everything. You just kind of see what you can do. And I love that you've just gotten to experience so many things. And then, so we've been super specialized in omega-3. So it's always nice for us to talk to people who have more of the breadth, and then they pop into the omega-3 story, and then they find it's nice when they corroborate some things that we've already seen, but also just have a maybe like a more clinical view of things. So the paper we wanted to talk about, it's called The Influence of Dietary and Supplemental Omega-3 Fatty Acids on the Omega-3 Index, a scoping review. It is a large paper, very helpful. Megan Dempsey is first author. Michelle Rockwell, like we mentioned, is second, and you're the third. And this is a large review study just trying to get a handle on what's affecting the omega-3 index. And so we would love to, you kind of alluded to it, but just the rationale for this paper was essentially like you needed to write it for your student. Is that right? Is that the primary or?
That's part of it, but the question I wanted to answer was how much omega-3, because all the time in practice too, they were like, how much omega-3 should I be taking, right? And that is kind of a big question, is what is the right dose of omega-3? And the question that we are looking to answer is, what is the dose of omega-3 that we should be recommending in clinical practice? So it doesn't quite read this way, but the goal of it was as a clinical practice guideline. I just did not realize the scale that it was going to involve. But that's what we were trying to write, was something very applicable. As in, if you are a sports dietitian or a military dietitian, those wouldn't be specific to injury. But if you are a dietitian, and honestly, any type of dietitian, because it's not specific to athletics, but that's more the dietitians I would work with. If you were a dietitian working and you were like, how much should I be recommending just for general health? We wanted to try to find a way to answer that question. So that's really how the paper came about. And then I pulled a student in, and then we had David Barker with the intern. And so all of these things just came together at the right time.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that is the ultimate question, and why I struggle with this. Because we are on the testing side, and people will ask me how much I should take. And I said, I don't know what your levels are, so I'm not going to tell you, which is not satisfying. And it's not something that you could do all the time. But it is not as easy of a question. Like, we kind of take for granted the old DRIs and finding the other vitamins and minerals, and they've done a lot of work on those to determine how much we need. And for the omega-3s, it's kind of newer. There are not DRIs for EPA and DHA, so we don't have that same level of evidence. And we have a lot of evidence, but it's just different. So you really went through and you looked at supplement studies, but as well as everything else that people have tried, food and food fortified foods. So I guess, can you briefly describe the outline of the paper, how many studies, what you're looking for, all that stuff?
So our criteria were, we started in 2004, and that was actually recommended by Michelle with the study that Bill, you guys had done, defining the omega-3 index and identifying that it had a correlation with cardiovascular risk. So
Right,
that's
right.
what we were really looking at. And that was the start of our criteria. So we did anything 2004 moving forward. And this was published in 2000, this was published at the beginning of last year, 2023. Frontiers has a really quick turnaround. So I want to say we submitted it in November of 2022. And
Nice.
so our study criteria to be included, where they had to have a baseline omega-3 test, some type of intervention, and a follow-up omega-3 test. But that did not have to be the sole outcome.
Mhm.
We compared, like, some of the people that we included had health, like cardiovascular disease, some didn't. We
Mhm.
looked at those separately and there weren't any major differences, so we included everybody.
Good.
I
Mhm.
thought we were going to have like 20 studies to review. Initially, we had 52. I know there are 58 in the final paper.
Yes.
Because again, so App State is a teaching school. I teach a three course load, which that means 3 classes every semester. My
Mm.
time for research is not as high as what a lot of other bigger schools have. So
Yep.
this took a while, and students are very good at writing, but they need a lot of revisions. So
Yeah.
a while. So every time we were doing another revision, we'd added papers. Over, I bet, I haven't checked before this, but I bet there are probably more that have come out recently since that 58. So we ended up with 58. Even when we sent it to Michelle, she was like, I can't believe there are 58 papers. We were adding until the month before we sent for publication. But anyway, they had to have the baseline and the follow-up. That did not have to be the primary outcome. And they had to define what the supplementation protocol was. So as you
Mhm.
mentioned, we included food. Some were fortified foods. There were only, I think, I'm going to say like 9. I just read the paper
Yeah.
again. Preparation for
And
this.
what kind of foods were they, just for
So they
examples?
were mussels, chicken, sausages, eggs. Hold on, I did write some of it down. Those were the main ones. Oh, and
Fortified
margarine.
mussel.
Margarine was another one. Yeah, they did fortified mussels. I don't remember what country that was out of because we did list that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, and so some of the foods were surprising, like the sausages, eggs, not so much, but like mussels, sausages. And then one study was actually with fish itself, but it wasn't like Norwegian teenagers, and they listed they had pretty low compliance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the margarine was the biggest supplementation one.
Yeah.
And then and the rest of them were all for like some type of dietary supplement. And we included all of those and then looked at what the baseline was, what the follow-up omega-3 index was, what the time frame was, what the supplementation protocol was, and also the country of origin, because they didn't report a lot of dietary factors. So we did include with that, and if they had any underlying health effects. And you can see that in the big
Yeah.
table. Also, just throwing it out there, that is a freely downloadable paper.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So
Right.
that's fantastic.
How
It's
did you-
Frontiers in Nutrition.
How did you define the omega-3 index for these studies?
Great question. So we defined it as if they listed the omega-3 index, and that's what they called it. And that's one of the things we did have to talk about because there were different laboratories. So like 3 of our studies, for example, were out of the combination of Austria and Germany, and they all had really high baseline omega-3 indexes. And actually, sometimes you get frustrated with the review process, the peer review process, but in this case, it was helpful. So one of our peer reviewers said, not all of the omega-3 index are measured the same way and follow the same protocol. And so you need to account for that in there. So we didn't really do a deep dive, but if they listed it as omega-3 index, that's what they wrote in their methodology. But there were different laboratories, and that could account for some of the variations. So, because some of the studies were like a 8 or 9% starting, and then went up to 13 at the end, and that was just these like 3 laboratories out of Austria and Germany. And we did put in there like we can't account for how they did this with the laboratory.
Right, but it's all red. It's all red blood cell EPA DHA.
Yes, it is all red blood cell EPA and DHA. Yes, it was.
That's usually our big fight, is that it's plasma or it's EPA, DPA, DHA, and it's
No. We didn't include anything that was
Yeah,
plasma, EPA, and DHA. It was all red blood cell DHA.
that's good.
All of it was that we included in there.
Yeah, that's amazing. You found that many studies with pre-post. Is that something we kind of harp on? So that's the scope of the study. What were your main takeaways?
So one of them was almost everybody was low. The baseline values, with the exception of a few laboratories that, let's say, unorthodox, because I'm not an expert enough to know how they tested it. The average was, I'd say, about 3 to 5% across regions. That was their baseline omega-3 index. It did almost all of them improve with supplementation, at least EPA and DHA, not as much ALA. And that the final, like we did.
Include ALA? Did you included ALA?
We did.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, we did
Yeah.
include ALA, which had really minimal impact
Yeah.
on the omega-3 index, almost no impact at all. But we
Right.
did include that because that is the dietary one. And so
Yeah.
I work in the applied world a lot, and
Mhm.
you'd be surprised how many dietitians recommend ALA as a good source of omega-3, which technically it is, but
Right.
you're not getting some of the benefits of EPA and DHA. So
It's-
we did include that, yeah.
Very
It's-
important.
It's
It
very
also
important.
studies. Yeah,
That's
we
great.
included that, and that had almost no impact at all on the
Mhm.
omega-3 index.
So how many people were altogether in the study? How big is the study?
Which study?
When you
Our-
pool all of your 58 together, you talking
Oh,
about
wow.
2,000, 3,000 people?
I'd have to look at, so they did vary a lot in sample size. I'm
Yeah.
looking at it now, some of the charts, because we have like a bunch of tables of it. So of the 58, because the way we did the tables, we divided it by protocols.
Okay.
I would say on average, most sample sizes were around 50, some were over 100, some were slightly smaller.
For any given study, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it'd be hard to pull them all. And we didn't do like a meta-analysis for a lot of reasons, one of
Right.
which not good enough at statistics to do that, and two, that wasn't really the goal of the paper.
No.
We are trying to just do like with the scoping review, just more of a generalized research question.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'd have to add them all up from all the different tables. And some of them are crossover because the way we designed our tables
yeah.
separated not necessarily each study, but each protocol. So for example, if
Oh.
one study gave an EPA versus a DHA, we included that as 2 lines. If
Yeah.
they did esters compared to triglycerides, we did that as 2 lines. Yeah, so the way that, yeah, so when you look at all those studies, some of them are crossover, but most of them are not. And
Mhm.
so it's like it looks like we have more than 58 studies across our tables, but we wanted to clearly define like each individual protocol with like esters, triglycerides, EPA, DHA, and so we made a different line for each of those.
That's
Yeah.
cool. That's
To
interesting.
go back to the original question, the overall findings were, and this isn't actually that novel, a lot of other people have suggested this with some more sophisticated calculations, but that it was about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of EPA and DHA to
Mhm.
raise the omega-3 index, and it was a minimum of 12 weeks.
Okay.
So that's
Yes.
From what to what?
So from below, that would be from about 4% to close to 8%, not necessarily over 8%. And I will say we got a lot of pushback from the 8% aiming for it. A lot of, when we sent this out, said that that was not a true target, like for different peer reviewed. So
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily get it to 8%. That would just be a statistical improvement from below 4%. And so probably just not necessarily a fully to 8.
Yeah. It's a interesting because it's the deficiency level is probably like that 4% target. And if that's the main focus, it's what does it take to get over 4%? This is something we think about a lot. 8%, there's a lot of evidence around it's better than 6, it's better than 7. There is a pretty linear relationship, at least up to 8% with better health outcomes. But in like the more traditional vitamin mineral sense, it's usually just like deficiency, and then you're within like whatever, and then it's toxicity. So there's usually not an optimal level defined for the most part.
And we found that would be, so if you were like below 4%, you'd get a statistical improvement, probably like between 6 and 7%. Not necessarily all the way up to 8 though, because when we were putting this in, a lot of our reviewers said that that wasn't a true target, that they didn't think it was that high, and that wasn't necessarily a goal. And so that wouldn't necessarily bring you over the 8%. And one of the questions I have, and I don't know the answer to this, that was just to raise the omega-3 index by a significant amount. I don't know what the amount would be. Like, say you got to 7 or 8%, I don't know what you would do to maintain it.
Usually it's about the same.
You got to keep to it.
You got to keep that dose to stay at that level. It'll respond. And like that, you said 12 weeks, that's usually what we also say for the kind of steady state. So that would be if you're at that level, that's when you're going to know, okay, this is the dose and that's what it gets me to. And then you can play with it, but it is responsive over time. But it takes that, you can't decrease your dose that much and maintain that level.
Yeah. What did you find with the different forms of omega-3, the ethyl ester versus triglyceride?
So that triacylglycerides were much more effective, and there were a lot of studies, well, at least a few that compared them directly. And so that triacylglycerols were much more effective in raising it than ethyl esters, that you would need a larger dose of ethyl esters to have the same magnitude of increase.
Yeah.
The other thing we found is that DHA was much more effective. DHA was actually more effective on its own.
Yeah.
That combination with EPA and DHA, and EPA was minimally effective. Now, I understand it undergoes fewer conversions, and I understand EPA has other physiological functions, so it's not like people wouldn't necessarily want to consume EPA. But as far as just an increase in the red blood cells, omega-3, index with EPA and DHA was the most effective that we found, and triacylglycerols.
Yeah. Part of that is DHA will actually increase EPA levels, whereas the reverse is not true.
Right.
That's
I understand that. I read a lot about physiology and biochemistry.
Yeah, I saw you put in the Methrol paper about retroconversion and how it's actually not a major contributor to EPA levels. And it's just interesting, even this far into the omega-3 story, some of the basics about the pathway we still don't know, or we're correcting ourselves. It's still really ongoing. You guys really picked out a lot of things that we have noticed or found it through other ways. So it's validating to be able to have you guys completely separately be able to look at this amount of research and come to these same conclusions. It just makes those are like nuggets of wisdom that seem to be pretty robust, and it's worth studying, like why is EPA versus DHA showing up to be so different? Because we didn't know for a long time, because we didn't have pure EPA and DHA, because in nature they're together, in fish oil they're together. It wasn't until they started to separate them out and give them that we could even see the different effects.
Did you see a different effect of food versus supplement?
So the problem with the food is they were really low dose. So most of the food was less effective, but it was also lower dose. So I think by dose comparisons, it was probably slightly more effective. The same dose. Like, so if you took like 250 per gram, right, per gram of EPA and DHA, but the food wasn't as high dose. So as far as raising the omega-3 index, food had a much lower impact, with the exception of these very high dose margarines. But again, I want to say, I'd have to go back at it. I think those are out of some of the same labs that had the high index to start with. Those studies are kind of just on their own. They used really high dose margarine. They had high starting levels. They ended with really high levels. So I think you almost have to take those and look at them separately than some of the things, because I don't know necessarily all their laboratory techniques. They might have differed.
Yeah. Do you have what's your opinion as to why there's no DRI?
I honestly don't know. So I wrote about that, and I was like, there has to be a DRI by now. And I've seen, really important big name researchers write papers, and I cited them saying there should be a DRI. And it's interesting to me because I teach this. I teach vitamins and minerals, and I teach advanced metabolism and macronutrients. So this is my curriculum. This is what I teach in our program. And it's weird to stand in front of the class and say, here's the DRI for ALA, but we don't have one for EPA and DHA. But then I go into a whole tangent about how important they are, especially now that we publish this paper. I don't know, and I don't get really involved with government and lobbying, so I don't know enough about it. But I can tell you on the practical end, at least in the sports world and tactical world, we don't care that there's no DRI. We're practicing like there is one.
When people ask you what's a healthy intake? How much should I take? What do you say?
So now, knowing this, my recommendation would be at least 1,000 milligrams, so at least a gram a day, 1,500. And I would probably say just like the combination of DHA and EPA, just because I think since there still are important functions of EPA and it's not just omega-3 index, and I would say definitely, and this is just general health, probably starting out at 1,500. The problem is most of and I've run into this a lot, most of the actual supplements that are available on the market are very low dose of omega-3. So you're looking at like 300 to 500 milligrams per tablet, not fish oil, but omega-3. So if you're asking somebody to take 2 grams, they either have to get a higher dose one, which is fine, they're available, but they need to specifically look for that, or they're taking a lot of pills. So usually just for pill compliance, I usually go around like 1,500 milligrams to start, and maybe higher if they're like boxers, military, then we might go like 2 grams a day.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation, but I do recommend it to all my classes. And what I was doing in India was I was teaching at the Institute, the Sport Authority of India in Patiala, which is essentially like an Olympic training center. And I was training their future dietitians and nutritionists and coaches. And boxing's huge there. And we talked a lot about omega-3s and boxing, and for them, like 2 grams a day, because high risk of traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We're getting more involved in some of the like American football studies and trying to do work around that, like prevention of bad outcomes when you are going to hit your head. It is going to get hit. You may get concussed in any of those sports, but can being higher in omega-3 help decrease those long-term effects is kind of where it's going, it seems like.
Yeah, where is if writ large, the military on omega-3 these days? I understand you can't use supplements. There's something.
They can use supplements, so it depends a lot on the unit. And so I want to start by saying a lot of my military knowledge is fairly outdated. I worked for the Human Performance Program from 2010 to 2012. Now I still have a lot of contacts there, but like I have not worked in the Human Performance Program for over 10 years. When I was there, you could absolutely use supplements within special forces. There were certain training schools that prohibited it, but mostly you could. The problem that we ran into with omega-3s was if you got a doctor's prescription, they were really low dose. So they weren't, I mean, like 300 milligrams. So you'd have to take so many pills. So now you're asking guys to go buy it on their own. And it's not, and I say guys, I don't mean to be sexist, but like I worked in special forces at that time. It was, and so we were asking them to go out and buy it on their own. We weren't allowed, we can make multiple brand recommendations, but we couldn't, say that this one has the highest potency because we couldn't endorse anything as the government. And so it's not that they couldn't do it, but anytime you ask people to go out and do stuff on their own, they're just not as likely to do it as if they could get it prescribed and not have to pay for it. But they are allowed to use supplements. They certainly are. And there are some companies that I think like Brain Armor has worked with the military because they have some liquid supplements. So there are some companies that for sure have been working with the military. And we actually wrote a grant. I worked with a physical therapist. And it wasn't just omega-3. We wrote a DoD proposal to try to do this huge intervention post-traumatic brain injury with physical therapy and cervical neck pain, a whole nutrition intervention, which was like 2 weeks of meeting with, maybe 4 weeks of meeting with a dietitian, not just included omega-3s, but not specifically, but they don't want something that involved.
Right. They don't want to see how well it works, and then they have to.
Well, it's just a lot of work because now you're asking people
to
eat with somebody and actually eat fruits and vegetables. And
it
was like, and it would have included omega-3s, but it wasn't exclusively that.
Sure.
How about the athletic program at App State? Are they into omega-3?
They sure are. So I am not the sports dietitian for App State, but we have 2 sports dietitians, and the students who work for them always report to me for their graduate program because I understand how athletics works and their scheduling pretty well. And I have like a lot of students undergrad like volunteer for them. So I meet with the dietitians on occasion too. I'm in the middle of doing a lot of body comp testing for the wrestling team to see. So anyway, they are using omega-3 supplements within the athletics department here.
Are they tracking omega-3 index?
No, they're not. They're absolutely.
We do work with a decent amount of like D1 schools at this point, usually like football, basketball, that's getting bigger, but it is interesting. And it's the sports dietitians are really on it. Like it's growing so much, but like I feel like Michelle Rockwell and of that cohort, they really pushed through because there was a ban on taking or recommending omega-3s for quite some time, and they had to push that.
And now you can provide them. So now
it's okay
to provide them, because when I worked, you were not the athletes were allowed to take them, but as dietitians in an athletics department, we could not provide them for them. Now the athletes are allowed to take them bought by the athletics department. But if you would like, I can definitely talk to the athletics dietitians. The problem here is we are Division I, but we are not a Power 5 conference. So we don't have the budget of like Virginia Tech or even Florida State or Florida or Penn State. We're on a much smaller budget here. So that's why they're not doing a lot of that. But they actually, for the size school that we're well supported. I do want to throw that in there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's.
How big is App State?
It's 20,000 students now.
That's pretty big. That's great. Well, yeah, it's really great to hear your perspective about kind of the real world, the dietetics world, the sports world, and where omega-3s is there. But yeah, it is a weird, the lack of the DRI. I know Michelle talked to us a decent amount about that, is that was an issue when she was trying to work within the government and or the military, trying to be like, well, there's no DRI, so why should we give it?
Yep.
So that is, it's a real barrier. But the more of this kind of research, we're finding more and more consistency and able to provide dietitians with more consistent evidence-based dosing and recommendations, and people can actually get better outcomes. And then
Right. That's what we were really trying to do, is make some type of, I mean, obviously there's so many variabilities, and that's why we chose the scoping review. Again, I had no idea there were going to be that many papers. I thought that when you asked like what was the biggest surprise, that was by far it, just the sheer number of papers that included this.
Yeah.
But that's what we are really going for, some type of clinical guideline. And we have a lot of charts there too of like how much different doses raised it. Like we had tables with starting and finishing levels, but we also had a lot of tables of this dose raised it by 4%, this dose raised it by 6% over this time frame. And the other thing I wanted to point out, you know, with recommendations, and I'm sure you all could speak to this as well, we didn't really see, I think the highest dose was like 4,400 milligrams that they used, and they didn't report any side effects, at least in the study. So it seemed to be relatively safe in that. So like, to me, the recommendation of 2 grams, the biggest downfall with it is just the sheer number of pills, not necessarily the safety concern. But on that side, like I had to get my mom, so I got my parents to take omega-3s. My stepdad had some cardiovascular issues. I personally have taken them, but I had to buy my mom children's omega-3s because she couldn't swallow the bigger pills. So some of that, and some athletes have talked to me about that as well. So that seems to be the biggest issue, not necessarily side effects, is compliance and swallowing. That's what I've seen on the practical side.
What's next for you? You gonna stick with the omega-3 story? You're gonna move on to something else?
So actually, no, we have, and this is random because I don't know if you've had him on your podcast or not. Do you know Nick Behringer, Lieutenant Colonel? He's done some work in omega-3s with the military.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, he's another good person that talked about omega-3s. Behringer. I can email you his name.
Tom Behringer's son or something? You know Tom?
I don't know Tom.
Tom Behringer, doctor in North Carolina who's into omega-3s.
Okay, so Nick's not in North Carolina. He's in Texas right now. Okay. He is a lieutenant colonel for the Army, did his PhD. So he was a dietitian for the Rangers, active duty, when I was a dietitian. And back when I did the human performance program, there were not a lot of us. So I talked to him then. We kept up through his PhD. He did some omega-3 research. We're actually doing, I'm kind of going back to my exercise immunology roots. We're doing a ginger trial. So that's what I'm starting right now. We just got some funding from him in Pure Green. He helped us orchestrate it. And so we're looking at ginger and the effects of endurance cycling and oxidative stress, which is much more where I'm an expert in. Still interested in the omega-3s, and especially on the military side, if we could ever coordinate with this physical therapist, who I know is also in research now, and look at traumatic brain injury. The problem, and I'm sure you've gotten this from Michelle and everybody else, working with the military is so hard.
It's so hard.
Really, really hard to get through. To me, if I did omega-3s, that would be the angle that I would want to go. And I just haven't found a good in that fits and would work and would be well funded at this point. So so I brought up Nick because he's done omega-3s, but we're also doing a big study together with ginger and looking at if high dose ginger, an actual food, ginger root, the food itself, it's like in this beverage, it's not a supplement. Affects oxidative stress and inflammation post like endurance cycling trials.
Great.
So so that's my next big project that we're starting. We're just like pushing through human ethics and getting, with the funding's there, it's just getting all this stuff approved and getting everybody trained and the equipment up and ready. So that's what's next for me in this. And like I said, like this is not this school. I love it here. It's beautiful. We've been using quality of life, but our research is on par with some of like R1 schools.
Oh, sure.
No, I went to a small liberal arts for undergrad, and it's teaching university, which I loved. I think it's great for students. And then Big Penn State for grad school.
And I went to Penn State, which was really cool. And I learned so much on Florida State. So now that I'm at App State, it's cool. I mean, I know my students really well, and that's why I was like this student who wrote this with me. We did our honors thesis through her undergrad, and then she stayed with me through grad school. So, we had a really good experience, and she had a great experience, and she comes out with a master's degree, a dietitian, and a publication. So Megan, so she wins through all of this as well. But I mean, I'm not done with omega-3s. I didn't just mean to dabble in it, but I don't know what's next. Like I just keep bouncing around to where the opportunities are. That's what I've
Yeah.
learned, is just kind of follow the flow of opportunities. And right
Mhm.
now, Ginger, we had a new exercise science faculty who's a really good cyclist. And
Mm.
this Ginger thing just kind of evolved, and then we got the money, and
Yeah.
then it's just following the research and the money.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
What we
That's
do,
cool.
we do,
Cool.
right?
Well, thanks so much for talking with us, and your paper's great, very practical. We've all the big points really have been corroborate things that we've found as well. So it's nice to have it all in one place. And it's really
That
good
makes
to
me
talk
feel
to you.
better. I'm not gonna say like I was
Yeah.
nervous when you all emailed me and read it, and I was like, oh, I hope it says what
Uh-oh.
I did everything correctly. Well, I think even still writing it, I've been practicing for a long time and writing for a long time, but still, I didn't do this research. It's a review,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that when I reviewed it, I interpreted everything the best way that I could, and that
Mhm.
does make me feel better about that.
You
That's
did a good
great.
job. Good
Yeah,
job.
you did a great job. Great. Thank you so much, Laurel. We'll be in touch.
Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.
Here. Bye-bye.
Bye.